Well, our reporter Siphamandala Goge is in Melrose Arch to get reaction to the death of the legal giant. Good morning, Siphamandala. I mean, I can just imagine that the atmosphere is quite a heavy-hearted one.
Indeed, across South Africa and across the world, we are talking about a great man here, a human rights lawyer and activist who played a crucial role for South Africa's transition from apartheid to a democratic state. I'm not even going to attempt to recap some of his achievements because I will not be able to do justice to that, but rather I'll speak to those who knew and worked with the great man here, George Bizos. One of those people is Advocate Dumisa Sebenza, who worked very closely with him during the TRC process as one of the commissioners. He joins us now. Advocate, thank you very much for your time. Many people have sent and expressed their condolences. They are talking about their fond memories of George Bizos. What are yours?
Well, I think when one talks about a man who was larger than life, and that was Bizos, one can, and I can speak for myself, I can only trace three main milestones in my knowledge and association with George. The first one was when, obviously, as a young activist, we read several books about him and his prowess in the Rivonia trial, as well as in other trials, mostly so-called political cases. And it was in that context that I began to know of him. And, you know, those who know better than I do, because they were involved with him in those trials, will tell you much about him than I can. But I can only mention Advocate Justice Poswa, who is now a retired judge. He was advocate in 1976 when he represented us, when we were charged with furthering the aims and objects of communism. During consultations, he did not have words to explain to us how he respects George Bizos, because in one of the appearances in which he was junior counsel to him, it appeared that he had, you know, shown how he can be courageous. And what I took away from that was the way in which he says he was fearless in his cross-examination.
You recently worked with him at the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, even though he represented great leaders, activists and political heroes at that time, but he also represented ordinary poor people. And I'm sure he departs at a time where he would have loved to see justice for Marikana victims.
Yeah, well, I still remember the first day that we went and placed ourselves on record before Judge Falam, where George, you know, typical of George, said, I represent the Constitution. Because I was representing the majority of the families of mine workers who had been killed. I think I was representing about 35. He was representing one of them. But the way in which we worked together, you know, because one would tap, you know, the wisdom that he had got. And those who were following the goings-on in the Marikana hearings will recall how when he did, you know, cross-examine or lead people in evidence, he was most forensic.
I'm told we're out of time, but I have to ask you about this. I remember a few years ago he spoke strongly about the lack of prosecution of those who were not granted amnesty during the TRC.
Yes, and rightly so, because the law was very clear. If you did not come to apply for amnesty and you had reason to do so within the window period, then you would be prosecuted, and he was well within his rights to do so.
Advocate, thank you very much for your time. That is Advocate Dumisa Sebenza, one of the people who worked closely with the late Advocate George Bizos, as we take it back to you in studio.